Hello, everyone. Oh, come on. There we go. We're going to phase back. Oh, there we go. I'm alive. I'm here. I phased back from wherever I was on some special ship, apparently. Gotta fill up my drink. Okay. Well, this is the Philadelphia campaign, part 1 of 2, Battles of Brandywine and Germantown, 1777. It says 26 minutes, but I was scrolling over. It's about 25, about a minute. So we'll run this with one. We'll go ahead and live crazy. Before we get started, this is History Rebels, by the way, and I'm enjoying their videos. This is, which one was this? This is 8. And then the next one is part 2 at 9, 10, 11. They have a couple others where they have conversations with some people, which I'm going to do as well. But anyways, before we get started, if you can click that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, completely free, helps me out tremendously, more than you'll know. And then you can donate to the channel through the thanks button. If you do, you request a video, you get your name sponsoring that video. It's my way of saying thank you. You can still request without donating. Just takes a little more time. You don't get that shout out. You just get this video was requested. This one wasn't. This is me with my love of American history covering the American Revolutionary War. So let's get started with this video now.
In early 1777, desertions have skyrocketed at the Continental encampment at Morristown as men go back to their families for the winter or abandon the cause altogether. To prepare for the expected British spring campaign with only several thousand men, Washington faces a Herculean task of rebuilding the army in just a matter of months. Although that campaign's location is still a mystery, with British plans being completely unknown. Because of this, Washington prepares a defensive strategy for the year and concentrates his growing army to react as quickly as possible to wherever General Howe strikes. In New York, General Howe has been secretly formulating new plans for 1777. Traditional European warfare dictates that capturing an enemy's capital ends the war. Although Howe recognizes that this is not an ordinary conflict, he nonetheless understands, correctly, that Philadelphia as the seat of Congress holds symbolic importance for Washington and his army, and that its capture would be a severe blow to the revolution. More importantly, by attacking the city, he predicts that Washington will be forced to defend it, leading to a general action that could be decisive. Howe has another reason to strike further south into the middle colonies. Joseph Galloway, leader of the Pennsylvanian delegation to the First Continental Congress, is a prominent loyalist, and he flees to British lines after independence is declared. He informs General Howe that up to 90% of Pennsylvanians are loyal, and that they will quickly rise up for the king once the army arrives. Like in other colonies outside of New England, patriots in Pennsylvania may have been a minority compared to those neutral and loyalist, but Galloway's claims were still a gross exaggeration. The belief that the majority of colonists remain secretly loyal to the crown is quickly becoming an article of faith within the British High Command, and it will cloud their judgment for the rest of the war. Like in Europe, unpaved roads and horse-drawn transportation requires dry weather for armies to move effectively, making spring and summer the primary campaigning seasons. But as April turns to May and May to June, Howe has still not moved his army, despite gathering some 25,000 men and significantly outnumbering his opponent. The pause is giving Washington time to recruit and train the Continentals, who now number some 10,000 men. In mid-June, Howe finally moves, with the hopes of drawing Washington into battle on the open plains, before marching overland to Philadelphia. But Washington has no intention of moving away from his defensible positions in the hills, to the surprise of few, and Howe refuses to attack, fearful of casualties that will be hard to replace, leaving the two armies in stalemate. The British Army in the summer of 1777 is well trained, supplied, and outnumbers its enemy, and the officers and men know it. leaving many baffled and angry at both Howe's cautious approach and the slow pace of the campaign. To break the stalemate, Howe feigns a retreat back towards the coast, daring Washington to follow him. The plan almost works, and Washington narrowly escapes being caught by a sharp flanking attack. After this final failure to instigate a battle, Howe evacuates New Jersey altogether in late June, abandoning thousands of loyalists in the process. Howe's actions are difficult to understand, but by early July, he at least makes a decision on how to progress what is left of the summer. Making use of British naval supremacy, Howe plans to take 18,000 men to attack Philadelphia by sea. General Clinton, left in New York with 7,500 men, vehemently opposes the plan, arguing, without success, that dividing their forces would leave both his and Burgoyne's command vulnerable and unable to mutually support one another. Once British troops embark, Howe inexplicably delays leaving port by almost 2 weeks, wasting both time and critical supplies on board. Once finally at sea, Howe is well placed to attack Philadelphia through the Delaware River and could land the army within 2 weeks. But faulty intelligence convinces Howe that coastal defences are much stronger than they really are, so he instead decides to sail a much longer route via the Chesapeake Bay. The decision is as unpopular as it is a blunder. Late summer winds come from the southwest, making the voyage long and miserable in the summer heat. Fresh supplies are also running out, sickness spreads, and the army's valuable horses die en masse. Washington has correctly predicted British plans, and he has been cautiously moving south with his army. After a miserable 34 days at sea, the British finally disembark 40 miles from Philadelphia in late August. After losing over 400 horses on the voyage, British scouting, cavalry, and transportation is greatly diminished, and the advance slows to a crawl. Loyalists are also not being recruited in large numbers, with many now reluctant to join up. Loyalist units were often relegated to foraging, scouting, or garrison duties instead of the more prestigious combat roles. Loyalists were also fearful that, like in New Jersey, once the British abandoned an area, they would face harsh reprisals by revolutionary forces. This, combined with rampant plundering by British troops, ensures that Howe is unable to raise anything close to the 2 regiments he expects. Washington, meanwhile, has made good use of Howe's slow campaign and continued to raise troops. The 2 armies now have approximately 15,000 men in the field, but the majority of the freshly enlisted Continentals have seen little or no action and lack the training of their counterparts. Some assume Washington will not risk his newly formed army in a general engagement, but they are wrong, and he plans to fight to hold Philadelphia. Washington entrenches his army along Red Clay Creek, blocking the main road to Philadelphia. Unlike General Gage at Bunker Hill, General Howe has never before taken the bait to directly assault entrenched positions, and he swiftly outflanks the Continentals. The maneuver leaves Washington scrambling to get back in front of the British on the road to Philadelphia, and they must march through the night to the next defensible ground on the Brandywine River, arriving on the 9th of September. The British are not far behind, and both sides now prepare for the inevitable clash. The Brandywine River stretches across the main road to Philadelphia, 25 miles east, and acts as a natural defense, with water 5 to 6 feet deep and steep banks on either side. There are a number of fords in the area where men can cross in often chest-high water. On the morning of the 11th of September, Washington concentrates the majority of his army at Chad's Ford, the main crossing point for the road east. He also posts detachments to cover adjacent fords and plans to funnel the British against his well-prepared centre. The army is confident and waits patiently in the early morning fog for any sign of their enemy. At 6 a.m, American pickets on the west side of the river begin engaging loyalists of the Queen's Rangers, who lead the advance guard of the British Army. 1,000 men of the Continental Light Infantry under General Maxwell slowly fall back, pausing only to harass and ambush the British van. As the fighting continues, vague reports begin arriving to Washington that suggest a second British force further north, but dragoons sent to investigate find nothing. For Maxwell's men, British artillery eventually forced them to retire, and the light infantry crosses the Brandywine in good order. As the musket fire dies down, artillery batteries begin to duel across the river. Washington is at the front and watches as British formations continue to appear along the riverbank, but they do not attack. Hours pass and Washington grows suspicious that all is not as it seems. At noon, he is informed that British forces have been spotted on the Great Valley Road. The Continentals have important supply depots further north, and Washington concludes that Howe is marching to attack them. With his enemy seemingly divided, he considers his options. Instead of chasing Howe, Washington decides to seize the initiative and orders an attack across the Brandywine. Continentals begin surging across several fords and slowly but surely push British formations back. As they start to make progress, Washington receives another message. This time scouts report that there are in fact no British troops on the roads north. This is contradictory information, but if it is true, could it mean that he in fact faces the entire British army across the river? Washington begins to fear that his army is...
Sorry, dog was about to knock over a light.
walking into a trap set by General Howe, and his army will be attacked in force once enough men cross to the east bank of the river. Washington decides that the risk is too great, and despite the good progress, he calls off the assault. Washington and his staff are left perplexed as they sit for lunch, mulling over the conflicting intelligence reports. But at 2 p.m, all is about to become clear as a rider arrives with an urgent message. British brigades have now been spotted just 2 miles north, with columns of dust rising behind them. Howe was not...
So there was something, there wasn't anything, there was... So they were, but people were probably misidentifying the correct road or route that they were on. That has to be it.
Marching further north, nor was he on the west side of the river. Howe had marched directly to flank the Continental Army at Chad's Ford, and Washington had allowed it. In the early hours of the day, the British had made use of local loyalists who informed them of an unguarded ford on the Brandywine River. Marching since 5 a.m, 9,000 men led by General Cornwallis had been moving to outflank Washington's position in a well-planned but not entirely unpredictable maneuver by Howe. A flurry of orders are dispatched by Washington, and General Sullivan, Stephen, and Lord Stirling are sent north to check the British advance. General Howe and Cornwallis have paused on a commanding hill to rest their men, having marched for over 9 hours across winding hills and streams. Despite being exhausted, morale is high in the army and confidence in its leadership has been fully restored. At 4 p.m, the British are ready, and 3 columns begin marching down the hill towards the Continentals. Grenadiers in the centre advance to the sound of drums and the marching song, the British Grenadiers. On the Continental left, Sullivan's division, comprising mostly of raw troops, are moving into position when cannonballs start landing around them. While the 1st Maryland Brigade attempts to form up, the cream of the British Army, the Brigade of Guards, marches directly against them. The British fire a single volley, charge, and break the Continentals immediately. The rout and preceding confusion causes the rest of Sullivan's division to also retreat into the cornfields, drastically shortening the American line. Lord Stirling and Stephen's divisions have found a strong defensive position on Birmingham Hill. They repulse initial attacks by British light infantry, inflicting heavy casualties. The British Grenadiers are next to launch attacks up the hill and are met firstly by cannon and grape shot, and then as they close the distance, heavy musket fire from the Continentals. In typical Grenadier style, the British fire a single volley and then charge up the hill with bayonets. The tried and tested tactic remains supreme, and Lord Stirling's position on the hill collapses. On the right, Stephen's 3rd and 4th Virginia Brigades hold on bravely despite now being alone on the hill. Captured American cannons pour devastating enfilade fire onto their positions. With their flanks exposed and British formations pressing them from multiple directions, the Virginians are soon forced from the hill. On the west bank of the Brandywine, 6,000 British troops under von Knyphausen's command had been nervously waiting all day for Howe to arrive. Dividing their force had been a dangerous gamble that almost failed, but now with the sound of guns across the river, von Knyphausen knows he can finally begin his assault. Continental cannon make the British pay a heavy price as they cross, but once over, a number of batteries are quickly captured at bayonet point. The Continentals hold on in hard but short-lived fighting as the majority of the supporting militia vanish from the field. As the light fades from the battlefield, the American center is able to slip away into the darkness, preventing a more serious disaster at the river. General Greene's division of 2,500 men have yet to engage the British. They are placed in a strong position surrounding a road, acting as a rearguard to protect the American retreat. 2,000 British Grenadiers soon arrive and march confidently into the Continentals. For an hour, the two sides trade deadly volleys, and the British are given a bloody nose to end the day. Greene's division has done its job well, and with darkness now covering the battlefield, both sides disengage. General Howe has won a tactical victory, but no immediate pursuit is carried out, not least because of a lack of cavalry. The battle has reflected both Howe and Washington's preferred tactics so far in the war. Washington to use American maneuverability and to lure the British into attacking entrenched positions. Howe, on the other hand, to use his well-trained troops to execute flanking maneuvers where possible and avoid costly disasters like Bunker Hill. At Brandywine, Washington had been let down by intelligence failings, but the battle also showed that Washington is being slow to learn from his enemy, which ultimately costs him the battle. The Continentals escape in good order, and in the coming days, Washington calls for further reinforcements to block Howe's army from crossing the final river before Philadelphia. Although defeated, the fighting at Brandywine has not ended Washington's plans to stop Howe reaching the city or his willingness to fight. The two forces close again on the 16th of September, but heavy rains prevent a battle. 5 days later, the British hear reports that a Continental force under General Wayne is planning to attack their baggage train to the rear. At 1 in the morning, the British move around the American camp at Paoli. British General Grey has ordered
Earl Grey. The man knows how to make delicious tea, I will say that. Delicious.
flints be removed from their muskets to ensure no over-enthusiastic privates pull the trigger and they maintain the element of surprise. The British attacked the camp and used their bayonets with cruel efficiency, killing, wounding and capturing over 400 Continentals. The next day, Washington first learns of the defeat when Howe sends him a letter. With Howe's typical mixture of politeness and subtle sarcasm, he suggests that American surgeons should be sent to Paoli because of high casualties in the area. The unsettling news is made worse with reports that the British had broken camp and were now marching north towards his supply depots at Reading. The reports cannot be confirmed, with disaffected locals refusing to inform on where the British truly were. Washington must decide whether to protect the capital or his invaluable arsenal. He chooses Reading and quickly marches north. the British movement is in fact a feint, and Howe has outfoxed the Continentals once more. With the pathway to Philadelphia now wide open, Howe is able to cross the final river unopposed, and finally marches into the city on the 26th of September to the celebration of its loyalist inhabitants. Weeks earlier, most of the revolutionaries had fled, along with the Continental Congress, who relocate to York. Once in the capital, the British soon revive entertainment suppressed by Congress, including horse races, cricket matches, and the theatre. The State House, where Congress voted for independence only 1 year earlier, soon becomes a tightly packed prisoner of war camp in the city. Despite Howe's success, there still remains an intact rebel army in the field, and consequently, the capture of the capital does not have the effect that the British hoped for. Although it does damage American morale, it leads to no serious talk of capitulation or even negotiation. The British also face supply issues, and Howe must send detachments to clear the Delaware of coastal defences to allow Royal Navy supply convoys through. With the campaigning season coming to a close, Howe believes the Americans are defeated for the year, and he camps with less than 9,000 men north of Philadelphia at Germantown. Despite a somewhat disastrous campaign, Washington is determined to strike against the British before winter and remind them that the war is not yet over. Thinking of his success the previous year at Trenton, he devises a plan for a surprise attack against Germantown, and he gathers some 8,000 Continentals and 4,000.
I haven't paused it, but I will pause it now just to say that I'm enjoying the story, and I don't really have much to add other than Washington always fell for the old throw it at you and then flank you. That's the one thing he always fell for. And look, I'm not saying that you put me in that situation, I'm better. But you got to learn from it after a while. You always got to expect it. Now, on the last one, intelligence failures, yeah, that's not good. And you don't know how many of the others intelligence failures did play a part. You have to say every single one of them because Washington did rely on other people to give him information. But if you're constantly getting flanked in battle, it's time to get new people to listen to, because you can't trust the people who are bringing you information then.
And militia to do it. Washington plans for 4 columns, 2 Continental and 2 militia, to attack the town and smash Howe's army against the river. After a grueling night march, the attack begins in the early hours of October 4th, and Washington orders his men to advance with bayonets. The first elements of Sullivan's van arrive at the British pickets just before daybreak. There is thick fog in the air, severely limiting visibility for both sides. As fate would have it, Wayne's column is advancing against the same British Light Infantry regiment that decimated them at Powley. Although outnumbered, the British outpost puts up a strong fight and countercharges the Americans, who initially give way. Both sides take heavy casualties, and the British are slowly but surely pushed back through the dense fog. Officers in both armies start to lose contact with their men, leading to confused fighting on the outskirts of town. As the British withdraw, 100 men break off and move inside a large stone building known as the Chew House. Barricaded inside a formidable position, they resolve to give and receive no quarter. Although the Continentals continue advancing past the house, Washington recognizes the threat posed by a strong enemy position in his rear. He calls a war council where some advocate bypassing the house, while others argue that it must be taken. Washington is initially indecisive and sends an eager Virginian officer to demand the British surrender under a white flag. The British reply with musket fire and kill the young man on the spot.
You turn your cannon on that house and you blow it to hell. Are we done? That's the response.
An outraged Washington immediately orders field guns to pummel the position. Cannonballs rip through the windows, but the stone walls protect most of the men inside. With time slipping away, Washington is conscious that he must press the attack now before the main British army can properly mobilise. He next orders 3 regiments to assault the house, but as they attack, the men are cut down by the dozen as British marksmen fire from the top windows and meet attempts to break through the doors and windows with bayonets. Despite almost breaking in, the attacks are ultimately unsuccessful and the British hold on while inflicting several hundred Continental casualties. As the fighting dies down around the house, further into town, the fog continues to cause havoc. Units and men find themselves alone, bumping into shadows that could be a friend or an enemy with a bayonet. Continental units eventually start to make contact with the main British line. But the sound of cannon to their rear, combined with the near-zero visibility, was starting to take its toll, and panic soon sets in. As if on signal, the advance hesitates, stops, and then collapses. Officers try to rally the men, but they cannot stop the retreat in the centre, as men walk hopelessly out of formation away from the town. To the east, General Greene's column has finally arrived and pushes British pickets back. Marching in the wrong direction, one of the brigades walks into a withdrawing regiment from the centre, and in the fog they mistake each other for the enemy and open fire, causing both to flee. Other regiments perform better, but are eventually too forced to withdraw after bloody fighting against loyalist formations. The 9th Virginia Regiment breaks through on the British right and captures a number of prisoners in the centre of town. But arriving British reinforcements under Cornwallis soon capture all 400 men of the regiment, who find themselves unsupported and behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, the 2 militia columns are nowhere to be seen, with one column becoming hopelessly lost to the northeast, while the other flees upon contact with the British left. The attack is over, and the Continentals have lost over 1,000 casualties, with the British suffering roughly half that number. The assault had been ambitious and brave, but in the end, it failed before it reached the bulk of the British army. This was not Trenton, and to succeed against Howe's main army, Washington needed close coordination, which his complicated plan made almost impossible for untrained troops. Although defeated, the long-term implications of the battle still potentially favoured the Continentals. In the aftermath of Germantown, Howe had once again failed to pursue and truly defeat his enemy, which had again retreated to safety. In the face of American resolve and Burgoyne's defeat at Saratoga, General Howe has become disillusioned with British prospects in the war, and he begins to ask to be relieved and sent home. For the Continentals, the bold attack at Germantown by a newly formed and recently defeated army greatly impresses European onlookers, helping Benjamin Franklin further in Paris. For now, however, the year was ending on a sour note for the cause. The British had soon cleared the Delaware of remaining Continental forts to allow supply ships through. Philadelphia was occupied, Congress exiled, and Washington's army was again reeling from a string of defeats. The only rays of light came from the victory at Saratoga and from the salons in Paris, where diplomats negotiated a French intervention. But for Washington and his army in Pennsylvania, their hardship had only just begun. Perhaps the gravest trial of their lives was about to unfold at Valley Forge.
Okay. Well, we'll end it there. Yep. Valley Forge. Kind of turned everything around, though. Well, I didn't kind of. It did. It turned everything around. This is good. I like this. I'm going to end this here, and then I'm going to get right back into part 2. I got to get another drink. But hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And until next time, have a good day. Have a good night.